Welcome everyone to NCEA's Implementing the Common Core State Standards in Catholic Secondary Schools webinar. My name is Megan Martin and I am the organizer and on hand to help with any technical questions about today's event. Before we begin, I have some housekeeping matters to share with you. First, please know that all of your microphone connections with today's webinar have been muted. During the presentation, you may ask questions or provide comments for the presenters by using the chat and/or question functions located in the GoToWebinar panel on the right side of your screen. To use these functions, click on the chat or question bubble and then click into the blank box area and enter your question using your keyboard, then click Send. We also invite you to post your questions on todaysmeet.com. I will send out the URL if you would like to post your questions this way. The link is todaysmeet.com/NCEA-CC. Second, the webinar presentation will run for 45 minutes, leaving some time at the end for the presenters to answer any questions that you provide. Third, you will be asked to complete a brief evaluation about this webinar later today, and your feedback is greatly appreciated. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and you will all receive a copy of the final recorded presentation, which we will email to you once the recorded file is available. I'm pleased to present Christopher Cosentino, Associate Executive Director of the NCEA Secondary Schools Department, and Dr. Carol Carey, Superintendent for Secondary Schools in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. Carol brings a perspective of successfully implementing the Common Core in the secondary school setting and is uniquely positioned to share the experiences of the Archdiocese of Philadelphia with all of you today. Please welcome Chris and Carol.
Thank you, Megan.
You're welcome. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today. Today's topic, Implementing the Common Core State Standards in Catholic Secondary Schools, is a result of several years of work the Archdiocese of Philadelphia did in both the K through 12 settings. And the goal for today is to understand the how, what, when, and why of implementing these standards across our 17 secondary schools. The points that we're going to look at today would be why the decision was made, how the implementation took place, when the implementation took place, how we involved key stakeholders, how we developed the curriculum and resulting in many curricula for our disciplines, how the implementation was communicated to our stakeholders, and the professional development involved, and then some results after our 2 full years of implementation, with us now in our 3rd year. I'll move quickly through the next few slides because those slides really just tell us the definition and kind of the background on the Common Core Initiative, which many of you probably already know. Just the fact that the Common Core State Standards Initiative was an education initiative in the United States, and it really just describes what students should know by the end of each grade from K through 12 in English, language arts, and math. A lot of people wonder where the initiative generated from originally, and it really was an initiative by the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. So those of you that may not understand that whole background, it's important that understanding is met, and perhaps more research on those 2 organizations on the next few slides may help with clarity. So I won't read these 2, but just so you know that they are in this presentation, which you will have access to following the webinar. So the National Governors Conference, which resulted in the National Governors Association, representing all 50 United States and its territories. The Council of Chief State School Officers, again, people need to be kind of reminded that it is a nonpartisan, non-profit organization. It is public officials who head elementary and secondary education in the U.S. One of the things I would like to point out early in this presentation is the idea of standards versus curriculum. When we were beginning our implementation, this was a key area that we had to really get get kind of buy-in from all of our various curriculum people, our administrators, teachers, that we all were talking the same language. So it's real important when implementing any new set of standards that people understand the difference between a standard and a curriculum. So standards basically tell us what a student needs to know to learn, and they are the skills that the students should have in any discipline, any given area of study. The curriculum, I always like to say, is the stuff the teacher does, the stuff the teacher uses, the stuff the teacher asks the students to do, and the stuff the teacher asks the students to use as a way to develop the skills. So it's all really the things that we provide as teachers, as educators for our students, whereas the skill is what the student must really have and understand and be able to do as a result of all that stuff that we provided. So in the Common Core initiative, it was really important, and as many of you may know now, with some of the controversy around the standards, is that the control of the curriculum, of all that stuff, is at the diocesan level no matter what standards are used. And that is really key to point out to our various stakeholders and to continue that thought. So standards versus curriculum, and then what or who has control of the curriculum, and that is the diocese, whichever diocese happens to be. So our journey began long, long ago in the spring of 2010. We started with a collaboration early in the spring of 2010 with the International Center for Leadership in Education. We had been working very closely with them for some years, and we asked them to do a complete review of all of our standards and all of our curriculum in our 4 core areas from K through 12 for English language arts, math, science, and social studies. As a result of that work that was done in collaboration with the International Center, we came to the realization that we just had too many standards and all this breadth but no depth in our learning. And each year, over the many years of our existence, we just kept piling on and piling on more standards, but we really weren't getting into the depth of knowledge. We were just quickly running through material. So it's important to just kind of say who the we was in this process. So I wanted to say that the superintendent at the time was Mary Rochford, and we had just one superintendent at that point for our K-12 system of schools. Now we have 2 superintendents, an elementary superintendent and a secondary superintendent. But at that time, we had the superintendent, we had 2 directors, one of curriculum and instruction for elementary and one for secondary. At that time, I happened to be the secondary director for curriculum instruction. And we had our math and English language arts curriculum committees that are made up of teachers from both elementary and secondary schools, separate committees at each of elementary and secondary. So these were the folks at the table as we began reviewing our standards with the International Center and deciding what do we do. So when we reviewed the Common Core state standards, which around June of 2010 were just becoming pretty much approved and available, we felt that they would really meet our needs as a baseline set of standards that were going to give us that deeper understanding, that depth of knowledge, more so than what we had been using, which were the Pennsylvania state standards. So in agreement, we all liked the standards because they had more of a skill basis to them, as many of you may know already from using them or reviewing them now for a few years. And they had less memorization, less knowledge-based learning, much more understanding, application, analysis, and synthesis, things that we felt were very important for our students. So we just made the decision and said, okay, we like these standards, let's go with it. So now what? What did we do next? We decided that our goal was to implement the standards as early as possible because we had heard talk of the national assessment that was expected to be available in the school year 2014-15. And if your diocese are like ours, we were often compared to our public school counterparts, although we had very little data that was really comparable. We had SAT scores, and many of our students, 90-some%, take the SAT, so we felt that was a really good measure of our performance. But our public school counterparts felt that that really wasn't a measure for them because so few of their students actually took the SAT. So we were excited because we thought this will be the first time that there will actually be a national assessment that helps us measure our results against schools across the nation, both public and charter, and then of course our own Archdiocesan schools. So we were anxious to get started so that we would be ready for this assessment that we expected for 14-15. So in looking at how we would implement, we said there are really two prongs. We need to implement the standards themselves, and we have to prepare for this national assessment. So we said that we would stage for a fall of 2011 implementation, realizing that we probably needed one full school year to do a whole bunch of work to get us ready for a fall of 11 implementation. So summer of 10, we said we're going to go with it. By fall of 11, we want it to be all the way in. So during the school year 10-11, we had to look at the following particular areas that you see there. We had to broadly communicate this whole plan of it, why we were implementing it, and the whole plan to implement it to all of our stakeholders. We had to really rework sequencing because, as you may know, the core sequence is quite different than most of what we all were using in our state standards. We had to revise curricula for the ILA and math areas. We had to look at pacing. We had to look at instructional materials. We had to determine this assessment plan. How were we going to know if what we were implementing really had merit and was getting the kind of results we would want? And then we had to provide a lot of professional development. So with those topics in mind, we began by offering the superintendent's newsletter in the fall of 2010, which focused on the Common Core and our plan to implement. It was quite detailed, giving specifics of why we felt the Common Core was the right approach, how it would be fewer but more meaningful standards, and how it would change some of the sequence of topics over the K-12 years. During this time, we added a lot of meetings to our curriculum committees. Generally, our curriculum committees would meet about 4 times a year. But this year, 10-11, we said we're going to need to have them meet twice as often so that they can do all of this work of sequencing and pacing and revising the curriculum. So we had to kind of really take a little bit of time to say, how are we going to fit these extra meetings into the year? Because that's always a challenge once school calendars are established, to just say, okay, now we have to add these extra meetings that involve pulling teachers out of classrooms. So we had to manage that, but that was an important piece to give those folks opportunities to do the work that needed to be done. Instructional materials was also a big consideration for us. Across 17 schools, you can imagine 14,000 students, 17 schools, the variety of textbooks and materials that were being used. But we felt that if we were all going to sit for a national assessment and we were going to want to do some common end-of-course assessments at the various levels through this process, then we felt that maybe we should be looking at using some of the same or similar instructional materials that would be developed based on the Common Core. So right from the start, we said that we would design a custom textbook for grade 10 for English Language Arts, figuring that that 10th grade would be the right starting place for us. So all 3,000 of our 10th graders would be using a new book that we customized through Pearson Education, and in the fall of 2011, when we implemented the standards, we also put in this first common textbook that we had ever had in our diocese. So that was an exciting time to really think about, how would instruction improve when all teachers were using the same book, how would assessment improve, and then the collegial conversations among the teachers and departments from 17 schools, that's quite a number of teachers, would be able to be very similar because they would all have a common thread there with their major textbook for that subject. So We began by deciding to use this new book and then developed a whole lot of professional development programming around the new textbook and the new standards. We also reviewed assessment systems during that year before the full implementation. We looked at them to see how could we best determine the way to measure results from this Common Core implementation. If we were going to have, again, a custom book, a fine set of standards that everyone would be using, then we also had to figure out what would be our assessment system. So we looked at quite a few assessment programs, but the one we ended up selecting was quite interesting for us. It provided us with an online computer adaptive assessment system, meaning that all of those 10th graders in English language arts and math who were on the Common Core, and the 11th graders and the 12th graders, and for math, geometry, algebra 1 and algebra 2, all 7 of the courses that were being taught through the Common Core state standards would be able to be assessed through Global Scholars' online computer adaptive system. So we set out to go ahead and get this assessment system in place, do professional development around that, so that in the fall of 11 we could be assured that we could do 3 benchmark assessments and end-of-course assessments, all administered online, where we would get immediate results and have opportunities to receive comprehensive reporting features which have really aided in our understanding of our success with the Common Core. In February of 11, we were getting pretty far into this, into this work, and we held meetings with all of the ELA and math teachers to tell them about the fall of 11 rollout with the new standards. So we wanted to go over the standards, show them exactly what they were, how they worked, how they spiraled through K through 12. And our elementary, just for those that may be interested, the elementary side of our Archdiocese was pretty much doing a mirrored plan with their folks. They were doing the same kinds of meetings, having the same kinds of professional development. They weren't customizing textbooks or doing the assessment system that we used, but they were still doing some of the basic things of any kind of change initiative to get people on board and to get everyone where they needed to be. The teachers were given copies of the standards, the timeline, and they were given an overview of the reasons for moving. You might expect that we've had pretty good academic results over the years, so some of the teachers would say, well, why are we moving to these new standards when we're getting good results? 98% of our students get into college and they're doing really great. Why are we changing? So it was kind of a hard sell there for the first few months to try to explain why we needed to get into that more depth of knowledge within our standards rather than just all of this covering of so many pieces that we had always been doing. So that was a bit of a challenge, just making sure that everyone understood the reasons we were making this major move. By May, we gathered the ELA and math department chairs together and spent 2 full days in professional development with them, reviewing the standards and all of the new curriculum documents. At the same time, we had changed over to the Understanding by Design framework for our curriculum, so that we were using a UBD template and pushing the Common Core standards into that framework. So we had the skill-based standards, the UBD framework, and unit planning, which was all new. All of this was so new for our people, but because we spent the time in professional development with them, we were able to really educate the department chairs in this process so that they would be able to go back to their schools and do the same sort of professional development for their department members. And again, you can imagine with 17 high schools, it's a lot of people, and you do have to sort of chunk things so that you're working with the chairs and then hoping that they work with their departments. And that seemed to have been successful. So September of the year of implementation comes along, and we opened ready with the Common Core. The ELA textbooks were ready, and in all 17 schools for our 10th graders. The online assessment system was ready, and we started with our first baseline assessments in early September. So we had a real starting place to look back and say where had we come from as we moved along now. The professional development was not a once and done kind of thing. It was really an important piece to this, and I would suggest that if anybody is in the beginning stages of implementation, that spending the time and the money, the resources toward professional development is going to end up helping your implementation tremendously. So we used the digging into the standards workshops over 3 days. Again, that was also a Pearson piece that we had Pearson come in to do for us, and it was based on the train-the-trainer model. So when the department chairs left, they had tons of resources from this 3-day workshop, and actually like workbooks to use with their departments to go back and over the 10 department meetings throughout the next, throughout that year, they would be working on this PD around the Common Core. So it wasn't a once and done thing at all, and I think that contributed to our success. By March of 2012, we had been now several months using the standards in classrooms, and we wanted to gather the math and ELA department chairs back together to say, give us feedback about their progress and the things that were concerning to them, ideas they might have had, and we thought that was really important. As well, it was important that they were able to offer ideas to us for how to put those common end-of-course assessments together, because, with 17, again, schools and students of such diversity across 5 counties, we wanted to make sure that we targeted enough of those Common Core standards to really get a measure of how did the implementation go, how did the students do with the Common Core, but to also have enough room for people to feel that their struggling learners could show what they've learned, and that we could stretch the higher ability learners as well. So their input was really valued and appreciated for how we would do those end-of-course assessments that would be common across all those courses, all those schools, and that would be a first-time event for our system. So once the department chairs gave the assessment feedback and we gathered their ideas, then the information went on to the ELA committee and the math committee, and both of those groups designed the end-of-course assessments that all students in the courses would take. And they worked on, then the ELA committee started working on a new custom textbook to be used for 11th and 12th graders, and that would begin in the school year 12-13. So by 12-13, we would end up having 3 grade levels, all with custom textbooks geared to the Common Core, with curriculum that we selected, and we would feel pretty good about the materials they were accessing. By May of 12, the end-of-course online assessments that had been designed were administered, and the 3rd benchmark testing was completed. So we had 3 levels now of testing to say whether or not there was growth. And that's really what we're looking for. We're students just making gains in their achievement. Then came the school year 12-13, and it's hard to believe that we're now in our 3rd year, but last year, in our 2nd year of implementation, again, we had the custom textbooks being used. We had lots of professional development behind us for our ELA and math teachers, but we felt it was important at this point to bring in the science, social studies, and technology teachers so that they could get a grasp of the Common Core literacy standards, because they had been kind of like a little bit of a missing piece during that 1st year. We really focused on just math and ELA teachers and felt now we needed to bring in the science, social studies, and technology teachers. We also developed at that point Catholic essential questions, because we thought that if we were going to be thinking in this kind of understanding by design framework, thinking broadly about the kinds of standards that require analysis and synthesis, then we thought we also needed to include these Catholic essential questions so that we didn't lose every opportunity to focus on our Catholic identity through the Common Core. So these questions, these 7, were developed in June of 2013, and they sit above all courses. We call them sort of like the umbrella over all courses, whether they're Common Core courses or not. But these are the broad ideas, the broad questions that we want our students to be asking, no matter which course they're in, which classroom they're in. They should tie the questions to any particular course. So those were developed, and actually we ended up having students from one of our schools design a poster around these 7 questions that is being printed to be placed in the classrooms across the 17 schools as a focus for everything we do should come from these 7 questions. So continuing through year 2, at this point in the spring, we had 2 years worth of data on the Common Core assessments that had been taken, and we were able to show really strong gains in ELA and math. The ELA particularly, the gains were unbelievable, like 5 and 7 percentage points per grade level after just the 2 years of data. And that kind of, I believe, was attributed, I can't say enough about this idea of having a textbook that goes across 17 schools. It just makes sense because now the assessment is really not only the standards, but the instructional materials working those standards. So we were feeling that change in the textbook contributed to the strong gains as well. And so now this year, year 3, we are continuing with professional development, and it is important that we include our administrators in the professional development because they are working through the Understanding by Design framework for the lesson planning that teachers do. So if administrators are reviewing those lesson and unit plans, they need to see how they are tied exactly to the Common Core. So we don't want to forget about in servicing administrators, not only on why the Common Core and how to speak about the Common Core to various external and internal audiences, but actually how to work through the instructional process around the Common Core and be able to really evaluate if the teaching is aligned to the Common Core. We are continuing our assessment, making really good headway in assessment, the whole idea of the online assessment, and I'm really hoping, as maybe some of you are, that we will eventually see the national assessment and be able to access that. We continue to work on the Catholic identity mostly because of the controversy that seemed to just crop up recently. When we implemented it back 3 years ago, no one was really bringing any controversial talk to the Common Core. It seemed like the states were behind it, everybody was really on board. And then all of a sudden, in about the last 9 months, we had all this controversy. So we've been addressing the controversies as they come across our desk, but I think it's important to tell you that recently both superintendents, my colleague for the elementary side and our secretary for Catholic Education, made a presentation to our Archbishop trying to educate him and his team about the standards and how to really understand the controversy so that he would feel comfortable in supporting our implementation. And he, in fact, is supporting it, and we were happy that he approved our statement to be issued on the Common Core so that when people bring any kind of controversial ideas about the core to us, we have a solid statement that we are all behind that explains our position, and it's really important that was done, approved, and in place, and it will be posted to our website in the coming weeks. One of the things that I think, if you are planning an implementation and you are receiving any of the controversy around it, this diagram for me really helps to explain to people that maybe aren't so sure of the Common Core standards. So we look at it as the Common Core state standards are really the basement. They're the standard, the basics, the things that every single student in this country should know and be able to do as a result of having learned in school. The ceiling is what the Archdiocese brings to the Common Core. We have always stretched our students to their highest potential, always looked for ways to challenge our students to do more and to do better. And so while the Common Core state standards are the basement or the base, we as Archdiocese are always shooting for higher, for the ceiling, adding our Catholic identity, adding our Catholic essential questions, choosing curriculum that really stretches our students in the way we wish them to be stretched. So for those that feel the core isn't strong enough, or it's too strong, or it's this or it's that, I think the explanation is we set the curriculum, we elevate these standards to the highest level that we feel our students can accomplish, and yet we are still falling well within the national benchmark for a basement so that every one of our students at least has met the Common Core standards, and if not those, the basement, most likely the ceiling. So we are ready to compete with the national assessment whenever that is ready for us. We feel we've really put the time and effort in to see that our people were well developed and ready to implement, and we're learning as we go as well. There are always new challenges and new little tweaks that we have to add, but we are well underway, and I think that anyone who's looking to move toward the Common Core and really just get it done, you don't have to worry. If you put in the things that I've discussed, you should be very successful. Some of the results that I wanted to share with you, because I think people talk in metrics, and they want to be sure that if we're going to take such a drastic change to implement this national curriculum or national set of standards, then we want to make sure that we're still going to be achieving. And I can tell you, our SAT scores for the last 5 or 6 years prior to the Common Core had been very flat. We were just gaining a point here, a point there, maybe down a point, up a point. But this year, for the first time in a long time, our schools took significant gains in SAT scores. Philadelphia Diocese, in our city schools alone, went up 17 points. And if you look down this table, John Hallahan High School gained 20 points, combined points, Little Flower 49, and 31 for St. Hubert, and West Catholic 94. So those are pretty significant gains. We had some schools that went down a little bit. Father Judge just 4 points, 3 for Roman Catholic, a few more for Mingoretti, but overall we feel these are significant gains, and we attribute them to the higher level thinking, analysis, synthesis that our students are now doing as a result of the Common Core. And this group would have been, it's in its second year of implementation, so we feel that it has made a difference. The next slide is our suburban schools, and you can see here our suburban schools, Archbishop Wood, Carmel Egan up really high in numbers. Cardinal O'Hara up 29 points, and Lansdale and Pope John Paul II up 33 and 36. So I don't think we would have had those kinds of gains, had it not been that we took a real big leap here on the higher level depth of knowledge set of standards that we're using. So my advice is just do it. Just decide, because we're not bound by all kinds of state bureaucratic issues that have to be dealt with. We are, as diocese, can make decisions at the superintendent level, at curriculum level. We had the full support of our bishop and, of course, Archbishop Chaput with this implementation. And so why not just do it? We don't have to wait for our states. We can just say we want the best standards we can have. Let's go for it. You have to do a lot of planning, as you saw from the previous slides. A plan is really critical. Without a plan, you have a plan to fail. So plan well. Really, take the year to figure out everything that needs to happen and how you're going to make those things happen. And then provide lots of professional development. I cannot stress that enough. And moral support. teachers were really wary of the whole assessment component and the demands of accountability. It was never done before where we would have online data immediately available for every student 3 times a year based on, how that classroom instruction was getting at the standards and how the students were improving and gaining throughout the year. That's really critical, and as a teacher who never might have worked with data, to just the thought of someone's going to know how my class did, how many gains my students made or didn't make, what happens then, and what would that conversation look like? What other development might that teacher need? That was kind of scary for our teachers. And the whole idea of an end-of-course assessment that was graded electronically, where we didn't have assessments where the whole class may have done poorly, so the teacher would curve the test and everybody ended up faring pretty well. It wasn't any of that. This was an online assessment, graded online, and there were the results. So it was important that we provided a lot of moral support to our teachers so they would not be afraid to fail, because if they did through their assessments, we would be there to pick them up and say, well, here might be how we can work through this. It wasn't meant to be like a gotcha kind of thing. It was meant to help students learn and help teachers with their best instructional practices. Continuously monitoring the progress, that was easy to do with the online assessments and getting feedback. We also, I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but we also asked for survey feedback from our teachers after the first year, just again to make sure that anything that they were really struggling with we would address in the second year. And remember, the standard is just that. It's a standard, the basement, not the ceiling. And we're going to go way beyond the ceiling and reach for heaven. So our journey continues. We hope that we'll get to that national assessment sooner than later and be able to show the good work that is being done in our classrooms. So I am through my part of the presentation, and I think that Chris may have some questions that have been coming in, and I'm happy to answer those.
Dr. Carey, that was really great job, and we all appreciate the information you shared with us. We do have some questions, if you don't mind answering.
Not at all.
The first one is, what was the name of the textbook adopted for grade 10 on ELA?
That's a great question. Let me see if I have it right here on my shelf. I do. There is not, I can't really tell you that there's a name because it's our custom book, and it's English Language Arts. And for grade 10, we selected the, we used the Pearson Literature book as our beginning basis, and we said that, this had to be, I'm trying to remember right now, I'm working from home because of all of this snow, but let me just grab my book and I'll talk about that in 1 second. Hold on. Okay, it was just a few feet away from me. So we looked at the Pearson book, and then from there we selected the literature and the informational text that we felt would really match our needs and would align to the standards. So we picked world literature for 10th grade. Now this is how the Common Core is for 9th and 10th grade. It's really selections from world literature. So that was a big change for 10th grade teachers who prior to that we had sequencing that was American literature in 10th grade. So then it became, well, do you want to teach 10th grade or do you want to teach American literature? Because if you like 10th graders, then stay in the 10th grade and teach the world lit. If you like American lit more than you like 10th graders, then go to the 11th grade and 12th grade and be with the American lit. So we customized a book, and I can't tell you the name of it is English Language Arts in the Common Core, Volume 1, Custom Edition for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia. And I know that Pearson had this book at NCEA last year on their display, so they'll probably have it again and probably could get a copy of it for anyone that might want to review it. I heard at one point that the state of of Massachusetts liked this book so much that they wanted to use the same book for their Common Core 10th grade. So we were really kind of happy to hear that. And then for 11th and 12th, what we did is we took the, like, you know, those giant literature books that students hate to carry. And all of the resources are also all online, so we have all the online components. The kids don't really have to actually carry the textbook. It's available online as well for them. But what we did is took the 11th and 12th grade literature book and made the early American literature 11th and then the more modern American literature for 12th grade. So we kind of split those giant volumes in half, which helped with costs too, because we ended up with really just the cost of like 1 year's worth of the textbook that can be used across 2 grade levels. And that worked out really well, so we're happy with the Common Core custom editions.
Dr. Carey, based on that answer, I'm sure then, because somebody wanted to know if you had a link to that textbook.
I can probably provide that, yes. I don't have it myself, but our school folks do, and I'm sure I can get that for you. So I'll make a note to get that. I'll get that out somehow to you.
Yeah, if you get it to us, Dr. Carey, we'll make sure we can get it to everybody who signed up for the webinar.
Okay, and everyone will have my contact information there, so if it's just a particular person that wants it or a few that want it, I'd be happy, to have them email and I can send it directly. I just have to get hold of it first.
Great, thank you. Another question, Dr. Carey. People are wondering, is there a way that they could see the benchmarks?
To see the benchmark assessments, I don't think you can see them, Chris. The reason is that they're computer adaptive, so every time a student logs on, the test is keeping track of where the student's ability was on the last test, and then it starts from there and challenges the student further to the next level until the student reaches a point where the test realizes the student has sort of tested to his or her capacity at that point. So, I mean, I'm sure we can get some demo questions or sort of how it looks when you're taking it, but it's not just like one, it's hard to explain. It's computer adaptive, so we're measuring gains per individual on the benchmark testing. I don't know if that is clear. Hello?
Okay, Chris might have disconnected, so I'll go ahead and ask the next question.
That's fine, Dr. Carey. No, I'm here.
Okay.
I'm here. I'm here, Megan. Sorry. I was just letting Dr. Carey finish. I'm sorry. So the other question that somebody has is the presentation that you made to the Archbishop. They want to know if there's a way they could view that presentation, or is there a place they can view any of the documents that you used for your presentation?
That is in a kind of a booklet format that I could send to you, Chris. Again, I don't mind sending it out. The presentation itself is not posted on our website or anything. The statement will be in a few weeks. So what do you think is the best way to get that out? To you, perhaps?
Yeah, any of the information that you have, if you get it to us at NCEA, we can make it available to the members.
Okay, I can send that then to you.
That'd be great.
And I'm glad to do that. And I did ask Archbishop Chaput if that would be okay for us to send the presentation to anyone, and including our own schools, and he was, yes, he was fine with that. So I'm sure he'd be fine with it going out further.
And Dr. Carey, I guess they just maybe want your insights. Apparently in Indiana there's a new superintendent, and there seems to be a proposal to ban or change the state standard, the Common Core standards. What would you recommend regarding that? Again, my answer would be it's up to each individual diocese, that they want to implement the standards, or which ones they want to implement would be my answer. But I don't know if you have any other insights.
Yeah, yes, I do. Again, I shouldn't speak for other states. For our state, the Archdiocese can continue with the old Pennsylvania standards. The Pennsylvania Common Core, as it is being called, is the Common Core with that 15% that the state can add in of its own choosing. So we get to kind of choose whether we want to take all of the Common Core, parts of the Common Core, or keep our old state standards that were here from Pennsylvania before. So I say that you just take the standards, the Common Core, and you implement them with fidelity. You don't add, you don't take away. You implement them with fidelity so that the kids are getting those skills at the right grade level all the way through. And then you just decide which curricular materials suit our needs or your needs as a Catholic educational system. So that, you know, someone had mentioned, and I'm not that familiar with the elementary side at this point, but someone had mentioned like there were recommended exemplar texts that just were not going to be appropriate for Catholic elementary schools. So we just wouldn't use those. Just like in secondary, we looked through all of the exemplar texts and then picked and chose what we felt would meet our needs. And here's another example, like Shakespeare. We have an affinity in our diocese for Shakespeare, whether it's appropriate or not appropriate. People just love to teach Shakespeare. So even though it doesn't really fit in the 11th and 12th grade curriculum with the Common Core, one school decided that they're just going to do a Shakespeare play every year, 9th through 12th, because they have, you know, expertise in this and they just feel it's right for their school. We're certainly not going to stop them as long as they're, you know, meeting all the other standards and they're teaching the fact and fiction, and they're teaching compare and contrast, and they're teaching the reading skills through that literature. That's okay. So it's hard to answer, but I think that it's really good stuff, and I don't know why anyone would not want to implement the Common Core. I think partly the states, and I might be reaching here a little bit, but I think that the states are having a difficult time because of the cost of instructional materials, of professional development, of, you know, getting the buy-in from all the parent and community groups, and that costs money to do all of that, time and money. For us, yeah, it costs us time and money too, but not at the level that it would cost the state to go out and really change up all of their, I mean, Pennsylvania just did a whole website recently on the old state standards. Oh my goodness, it's so comprehensive, and to have to kind of redo all that, because it has all the pacing and sequencing in there, I'm sure it's costly. So I think some of the pulling back from the standards is a result of just plain old costs and the cost of implementing this whole new assessment program that should be coming along. So I don't know if I answered that or not.
No, that was great, Dr. Carey. Again, you're doing a great job, but we just have people with some great questions. I hope you don't mind we keep asking.
Oh, go ahead, sure.
The next one is they want to know who helped the Archdiocese develop and implement the benchmark computer adaptive testing?
Well, actually, the Global Scholar, the company that puts that out, it's called Performance Assessment and Achievement Assessment Series Testing. So the performance and the achievement are the names of their two tests. They're aligned to the Common Core. They have alignments to almost all state standards across the country, plus the Common Core state standards. So we just simply said we want our kids tested on the Common Core state standards. So the test itself is already developed by Global Scholar, which is actually a division of Scantron Corporation, who has great experience in the whole, you know, metametrics behind testing, assessment, etc. So that part was easy. The hard part was when I was director of curriculum during this time. That was the hard part was making sure that, like, our largest school, Archbishop Ryan, with 1,300 students, needed like about a 6-week window to get all the students through all the computer labs and everything to be able to do the testing. A smaller school, perhaps like John Hallahan with maybe 500 or 600 kids, that would take fewer weeks, maybe 3 to 4 weeks to get all of the students through. A school like John Paul II, where every student has his or her own netbook, it was simple. You could do almost all the testing in a matter of a few days. So having each school organize its own test plan was important because each school's needs were different. I simply said, here's the window. We're going to have a window from September 3rd through October 11th, and then the schools would test their kids within that window. And as long as they fell in that window, then all the data that would come back for that benchmark period was all aggregated, disaggregated by school, by student, by however I wanted to look at it. And that part was pretty easy. We did have a project manager from Global Scholar who just ensured that all the things that had to be opened, all the things that had to be set up in terms of parameters of the testing windows and the time frames, were all in place. But it was not a very difficult process. I think the more difficult part was just the fear of people seeing that kids, their scores were going to be immediate and they weren't going to be sitting in boxes in an office on paper for months before somebody actually ever looked at them. So that was not a hard process.
Great. The next question, Dr. Carey, what was the technology environment that these different schools were operating in? Were they one-to-one schools, or bring your own device, or were the schools providing the devices for the students?
They really varied, Chris. Again, with 17 schools representing 5 counties from the city of Philadelphia all the way out to the most affluent suburbs that you can imagine in Montgomery County. We had, like this one school, Pope John Paul, every student when the school opened 4 years ago now, had a netbook. So that was easy because the bandwidth was there, the technology infrastructure supported this whole assessment process. A city school may have had to have a little growing pain that first couple assessments where they put maybe 7 or 8 labs full of kids all on at the same time to take the test and realize their network went down. So they would have to reschedule. Well, I can only schedule up to 300 kids at one time, not 600 or not 500. So there were some growing pains just to figure out which schools can do what. Some do have the one-to-one devices, some have the bring your own device. We found that the testing works great on iPads, netbooks, on regular desktop computers, not on phones so much because kids aren't going to look at a tiny little screen to do math problems, but the variation was so great, but it worked. And I say often that even the schools where they struggled a little with those first couple tests because they would lose their bandwidth and it would just, they would drop the test, they ended up, adding on to their infrastructure to make sure they could test better the next couple times. So I guess it's sometimes like which comes first, the chicken or the egg. Sometimes you have to say, this is where we are, this is where we're going. Now you're going to have to figure out how to get there if you're not there, versus waiting 20 years till everybody catches up with one another, and then by then it's something else you want to do. So we did force it a little bit for some of the schools that weren't quite technologically ready, but they got ready, and it's been fine. It's been good. And again,
Great.
all of that was to prepare us for this big national, online park. We were looking at the park assessment, but now I understand that if our state does not go with park or Smarter Balanced, if the state pulls back and doesn't do a national assessment on the Common Core, then park or Smarter Balanced won't let an individual district, like the diocese, go ahead and use their testing. I'm working on that through our PCC right now with Sean McAleer to try to figure out how we can get hold of that assessment if we want it, even if our state doesn't get it. So that could be a little stumbling block, but we'll get over it.
And that's actually great you shared that information, because we did have a question about NCEA lobbying to get that information. That's something we'll have to follow up with our members, that we can't necessarily answer that question today.
Right.
So the next question is, could you identify 2 or 3 of the most common critiques of the standards that you saw and how you were able to address them?
Yes. The first one would be the algebra being kind of taught in 8th grade. Right now we have honors math, like many of you may have, where we have a certain number of students who take Algebra 1 in 8th grade, and then they pass out of Algebra 1 in high school and just go right on to geometry. Most of our high school teachers were really fearful that were these 8th graders all, we have like 40,000 and some elementary students. I don't remember the exact number of them, of 8th graders, but you can imagine it's quite large. So would all of these 8th graders come, geometry ready to 9th grade? And we had to assure our teachers that no, they probably won't. There's still going to be a need to teach Algebra 1 in high school, because we're going to still have some struggling learners that are not going to have it down pat by 8th grade. Even though our kids are going to start earlier with algebraic concepts, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, and on, there's still no real guarantee that every 8th grader is going to be ready for geometry. So that was a little bit of a challenge to just try to, again, build the teachers up and say, don't worry, we're not going to expect algebra is going to go away. There will still be a need for some algebra courses, but maybe fewer than we have right now. That was one of the biggest ones. The other one was, again, this idea of Shakespeare. We have hobby teachers that love to teach the thing they love, and you can't blame them. That's something they've become really expert in. And they were disappointed that we didn't get to do as much of the British literature, because prior to the Common Core, I believe it was 12th grade was all British literature the whole year. So they had a full year of all that Shakespeare and everything else. Now they don't have that. It's replaced with a lot of the informational text, and that was hard for people. Like, what do you mean I can't teach my favorite, literature? Well, again, it's not the literature, it's the skills that we're trying to teach. So they can read anything and have great skills and abilities. And that was a hard piece to get through, especially our English teachers that just love certain parts of literature. But now we've gotten past that. We keep talking about these are skills. It's a skills-based set of standards. It's not just to read for to know the plot of every classic piece of literature that existed. It's more about what are the skills a reader needs to be able to read anything at any time. So they were the biggest challenges.
Thank you. The next question, Dr. Carey, is people would like to know, what are the costs associated with implementing the program, regarding materials, professional development, staff development, not only the cost for the Archdiocese, but is there a separate cost for the individual high schools?
Yes, each high school is expected to contribute to professional development for its teachers, and for its textbooks. It wasn't really a cost there, because we in Pennsylvania have Act 9195 funding through Pennsylvania that covers our textbooks, as long as they're not the religion textbooks. So the year that we did the custom book for each of those 3 English grades, we simply said to the schools, if you were planning on doing a new science book this year, you might have to put that on the back burner for a year, because we're going to ask you to purchase this particular book for English. And they were okay with that. A few of them, a little bit ornery at first when they thought that we were usurping a certain number of dollars from their textbook monies, but it's just a matter of what it was going to apply to, an English book versus a social studies or science book for that year. And they were okay with that. And the other bigger piece is the PD, the professional development costs, the costs of having, to cover classes when people were being pulled out to work on the curriculum. So I really wish I had more of an exact number per school, but a lot of our billing is based on this kind of a per pupil cost per school or a per teacher cost. So it again varies by school, size of the school. But we didn't have any real budgetary issues around the implementation. We do a lot of the work with our teachers who volunteer to be on these committees, and pulling them out of class is the only cost, but then we just either cover their class with our other teachers or in other ways, so that we're not actually accruing heavy costs associated with this. There were some costs maybe in that first year related to just simply copying materials for some of the workshops so that people could have something in their hand. And then mostly everything now is on our curriculum wiki, and an educator portal that we have, so everything's published electronically. at this point. But a few years back, there was some cost involved in just running things off for people. Because, again, it's quite a large system.
Great. And I think this is related to the 7 standards you had put up, but somebody wants to know if they can have access to your 7 Catholic standards. And I think that were the 7 statements you had that I think one of the students is making a poster.
Yeah, the essential questions, 7 Catholic essential questions. Yeah, we can get those to you. They're on one of these slides. I'm just trying to.
You know what, if it's on the slide, that's fine, because everyone will get a copy of this webinar, so they'll have them available on the slides.
Yeah, and they're right. They are on one of those. I can't tell which one.
No, that's okay. If that's what I think they're referring to. Like I said, everyone gets a copy of that, so they will be able to see those that you have on there.
Yeah, and they're pretty cool, because when you really look at those, it doesn't matter whether you're teaching, fine arts or math or science. If you're drawing the students' attention to those 7 questions that guide really our entire mission of Catholic education, they work pretty well, and we're pleased with those.
Great. Just a few more questions, Dr. Carey.
Okay.
The next one is, how much additional work do you think each teacher was asked to do as part of the implementation process?
I think they were asked to do a good bit of work, honestly. I think, Chris, the fact that we moved to the understanding by design framework at the same time, and I had promised them after the first year of implementation, I said no new initiatives for a year or so. I'll let you just kind of work through this one, because this one was big. But what we did is the curriculum committees developed the understanding by design template, all the sections of it, the skills, the assessment, the the goals, how long the unit might take, the whole thing. And then all we really left was the lesson plan, or the unit plan, for the teachers to do, which would be the stage 3 of the Wiggins and McTighe UBD framework. So the curriculum committees did like I would say 2/3 of the work in writing the curriculum for each of these Common Core standards. And then the teachers had to just do the planning around that plan, that UBD template. So I would say teachers had a good bit of work to do over that summer between fall of, the spring of 11 and the fall of 11. That's why we were so adamant about getting a really strong in-service done in May of 11, so that the departments could really in-service their teachers between the end of May and the end of the school year, and teachers could go away for the summer with this really solid resource to work through and plan during the summer, so coming back in the fall they would really have a good sense. And yes, the first year, although we have great teachers, we really do, and no complaints, but we did not look at instruction like, oh my gosh, you're not quite doing exactly what we want. As long as we knew you were using the new custom books, that you were doing the standards to the best of your ability that first year, we were happy, because it was a lot of work for them. But now we're in our 3rd year, and I don't hear really any complaints of any sort. People feel pretty good about it. And to be able to publish those SAT results, and for the teachers themselves to see the gains their students are making in the classroom using that assessment process that we have now, they can see, they're seeing the results themselves. And they're also seeing, where is this student not achieving? Where's this skill weak? Or where in this classroom is there a gap in the learning here, and what do I need to do to change that? So they're getting really good metrics about their own instruction, and it seems to be working.
Great. And we're going to try to wrap up in just a few minutes, Dr. Carey. So just, I think we have like 1 or 2 more questions. Did the elementary schools in the Archdiocese implement the Common Core as well, and was that concurrent with the secondary schools?
Yes, it absolutely was. Absolutely. We went full tilt on this, all the way up, K through 12. And their plan
Great.
is very similar to mine. Yeah.
Great. Just two questions, and again, I appreciate your patience.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say are some of the common misconceptions that some of the school administrators had about the Common Core?
I think that I think early on they just didn't understand that it was fewer standards than ever before. I mean, our curriculum standards were just like binders full of things. And I think that they just saw this as another, like a big headache of all having to learn all this new stuff. And really, it was a misconception in that this was skill-based, not knowledge-based. Whereas our old standards and guidelines would say, you know, it would be like everything was memorize this, times, places, dates, names, whatever. And I had to keep explaining to them that these standards aren't asking what color was the girl's hat in the story. They were asking, why was the girl wearing a hat? That, to me, is the main difference. And once I could get that through, that it's really more about, you know, depth of understanding, synthesis, analysis, all those things, applying your knowledge, not just simply memorizing stuff, they started to come around with more of an understanding. One of the best things, in case anyone doesn't know it, the Common Core, there's an app for your phone, for your iPhone or your iPad, of the Common Core state standards. And when you put them on your phone or your iPad, and you just can look at them real quick at a glance, and you can see these are skills. I think just really seeing them, I think at first people didn't really take the time to read them and see what they really were, and therefore misconceptions were started before they even knew what they were really dealing with.
Great. And again, this is not necessarily a question, but something maybe you could follow up with me. A couple of people are asking about the assessment tool, the link. I think they've gone to the Archdiocese website and have pasted a link. They're asking if this is the right assessment system that the Archdiocese is using. Maybe at some point you could email me that link, and I can again provide that to the members so they can get a sense of what system you're all using in the Archdiocese.
Yeah, I can. But just again, so that everyone's clear, if you go onto the web, just onto the internet, and you pull up Global Scholar Performance Series Assessment, just even start there, and that'll give you the whole background of what it is, how it works, what the test looks like in terms of the general, the general idea, and that should help. But it's Performance Series Assessment, and it's by Global Scholar, and they have a full website all about it. I actually did a presentation last year at NCEA on our assessment platform and the data and how to read it and review it and the results we were getting. I'd be happy to send that. Now, data in it is a year old, but I could send that to you as well. It's a PowerPoint, if anybody's interested. That shows like screenshots and all that kind of thing. That might actually.
I think that'd be great. Dr. Carey, I know we ran a little over, but I can't thank you enough. I think you just did an excellent job, shared a wealth of information that I know will be beneficial and very useful to your colleagues in Catholic education. And again, we want to thank you for taking all this time and sharing your insights with all of us.
You are very welcome indeed. It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And
thank you very much. That concludes today's Implementing the Common Core State Standards in Catholic Secondary Schools webinar.